This is Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. In Minding the Forest, we talk about forestry, the importance of managing forests, and many aspects about the forest products industry. Landowners, loggers, and manufacturers all play an important role in keeping our forests healthy and contributing to the rural economy of Louisiana. This episode of Minding the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years in financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. Brooks Mendell is President, CEO, and founder of Forisk Consulting and has been a frequent speaker at the LFA's annual convention. In August, we had a chance to visit with Brooks just before the convention started and talk about several subjects concerning the forest products industry in Louisiana. There is a bit of background noise at times as we held the convention at the Golden Nugget Hotel and Casino Resort in Lake Charles, which can tend to be a bit noisy at times. But Brooks had a lot to share with us about what's going on in Louisiana, the South, and U.S. and Canada as well. We hope you enjoy the program. Welcome to Minding the Forest. We are sitting with Brooks Mendell. Brooks is the president, CEO, and founder of Forisk Consulting. He does a lot with forestry. He has been a guest of the Louisiana Forestry Association off and on for several years at our annual convention, which is where all the noise is coming from in the background.
Great, yeah.
We're at the annual meeting in late August right now. Brooks, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Now, Jeff, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here and being part of the program again at LFA.
So let's talk a little bit about Forisk. How did that come to be? What exactly do you do with that?
Yep, Forisk is a company that I started 20 years ago. We're a team of 10 forest industry researchers based near Athens, Georgia. We have someone we work with out west and someone we work with up in Maine. And we started that company after I finished grad school, and I was getting phone calls from folks saying, hey, could you do some research for us? And I was studying risk in the forest industry. And I said to my wife, and we didn't have kids at the time, hey, Liz, can I try something? And she said, well, now's the time. And so I found the domain name. First of all, forestry and risk is where the name comes from. Okay. It has two meanings: for risk, because I believe in that phrase, risk makes kings. So you have to be support. You have to take some risks to make things happen, but also it's a combination of forestry and risk management.
Right.
And we study basically the physical facts of the industry. We track every wood-using mill in North America. We track the forest supplies. We stay in touch with loggers and haulers and make sure that wood is flowing everywhere and find out what people are doing so we can help our clients make investment decisions.
Incredible. Okay, so tell us a little about Brooks. Where is Brooks from?
Yeah, so I'm an Army corporate brat. I was actually born in New Jersey, and we lived in Europe and Maryland and California, all over the place as my dad. His jobs changed, and my mom was a teacher. And then I did my undergraduate work at MIT, and then I worked for Weyerhaeuser for years out in the Pacific Northwest. I learned how to scale and sort logs. I worked at a logging camp. I moved to Georgia in the mid-'90s and became a procurement forester at a sawmill. And then went back to school, became a consultant, went back to school again, became a professor, and then we started this business in 2004. And so I've been doing this ever since, and I've been extremely grateful for the friendships and relationships I have in forestry. I just think in the bottom of my heart, it's one of the most satisfying and thoughtful industries out there. Jeff, you and I have known each other for a long time. I was looking. The first time I think I spoke at LFA was like 2008 or 9. Mm-hmm. So you and I have known each other a long time.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a great industry.
I'll tell you, one of the things that impresses me about this industry, because I'm fairly new to it, even though it's been about a decade, but the quality of people here. I mean, you know who they are. Yeah. They say who they are, and they have such a great attitude and compassion and affection for each other. It's amazing. It's not without its competition, because that's just the general business world.
10-4.
But just the camaraderie that you see among the folks across the industry is truly amazing. It's been heartwarming, really.
I agree. And people are very generous. I think that there is a sense where it's a small industry. So, if you're giving somebody trouble, everybody's going to learn about it. Yeah. But if you're generous in spirit, People will share with you their insights, and then if you have the same spirit in return, it just helps you manage your forest better. I mean, at the end of the day, like the kind of work that we do and that LFA does is a lot of it is about helping people make decisions about their forests. And it's about helping the industry be sustainable. So that spirit's really important.
Let's talk about Louisiana specifically a little bit. We have such an enormous wood basket for the size state that we have.
Yeah.
And of course, everything revolves around a market. And we need a market to get that going. And of course, the LFA certainly supports sustainable forestry. Wherever there's forests now, we want to make sure that's forests in the future.
That's right.
And if we can grow that, that would be great. So we really support that. Where is the biggest risk right now in Louisiana?
Yeah, I think in with respect to risk for forestry, and it is quite important in Louisiana, and it's relevant to other states too, is I get worried about, and in our work, about unintended consequences, especially from maybe legislation or policies where we don't actually know what the consequences are going to be down the road. For the most part, the kinds of folks that you and I get to work with in the forest industry who are running mills or managing forests, they're quite responsible and thoughtful about what they want to do, but they do respond to incentives. And so, it is nice to sort of, to some extent, stay out of the way, provide guidance. Here's the best way to do things, and then reinforce that and repeat that a lot. And people tend to best management practices. For me, is one of the best examples in forestry.
Yeah, true.
They're voluntary practices for forest owners. Loggers and haulers do the same thing. The master harvester programs that we have in the South, and folks that follow those, and the audits and the surveys indicate, we have 85-90% compliance with that. So I do worry about things where we start injecting preferences into the marketplace that have an unintended consequence on sort of the folks that we're with.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So one example for me has to do with, that when you read a newspaper, what you read the news, right? And what's news is usually new, whether good or bad, right? But it's what makes a headline. So in the forest industry, it helps to remember where our existing markets are and how big they are. So you think about pulp and paper mills and sawmills, for example. They account for 80% of the wood use in our industry.
Wow,
on the pulpwood side, it's a little bit less on lumber, but on the pulpwood side, literally, pulp mills account for 75 to 80% of the consumption of pulpwood and fiber in the South. So we hear about pellet mills or liquid fuel plants or the newest technologies. But the folks that are really taking down most of the volume that we really need to support our thinning activities and our forest health activities, they're the existing operators. The OSB plants, which are quite important in Louisiana and East Texas. So this part of the South, OSB is a quite important market-oriented strand board. They also use a lot of that pulpwood material, and those guys are really important. We want to make sure they're as healthy as they can be.
You talk about thinnings. That is the biggest challenge, certainly for landowners in Louisiana. Talking to foresters, that always comes up.
Yeah.
And I've got clients, they should have been thinned 3, 4, 5 years ago. What happens when thinnings can't be done in a timely way?
Yeah, so a couple things happen. So there's a market impact and there's a forest health impact. I mean, if a landowner is unable to thin their forests at the proper time, they are in effect delaying the ability of the forest to produce valuable logs, which we need in Louisiana. Because we have new sawmills, we have guys who make plywood, we have people that can really use those healthy logs. So that's one thing that happens is we delay the rate and the speed and the quality of those logs that we're going to be producing on a normal forest rotation. The other thing we do is we sort of, I'll use the word, we sort of constipate the process a little bit, right? Because pulpwood becomes, it's a byproduct of growing bigger trees, even though pulpwood was the first market. We've always saw in lumber, but pulpwood was in the South 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, which is such a dominant market and driver of forest management activity. But we do constipate that process a little bit, and then landowners, they start thinking about what else should they be doing with their land, which is the conversation that you and I are having with folks now. They're going, well, where do I send these trees, or should I be thinning once instead of twice. This is a conversation that's been pretty common.
Yeah.
And so then they start thinking about what else they should be doing with their land, which is step one to having somebody leave forestry, which is a horrible feeling.
You know, that's one thing. We had an experience with a college in Louisiana. We worked with a capstone project.
Yeah.
And we talked to them about, what is deforestation?
Yeah.
And so they said, well, let's cut down. It's like, okay, it is cutting down trees, but it's not exactly doing that. So go get the information and come back and we'll talk about what you
Yeah.
Well, most of what they found out was deforestation in South America and how we're losing tropical forests and rainforests.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a colleague who was working with me for outreach was saying, how how many acres of rainforest in Louisiana? I was like, well, yeah, there's none.
Yeah.
And so on a good sense, we had a chance to talk to them and say, yes, that's right, but that's not happening here.
That's right.
That's not a reality here.
No.
But the reality is, if I can't do something to make a forest product, then I'm going to make a parking lot out of it and have a great big industry there for something, because it's land that has to produce for the landowner. You can't just leave it there and expect something good to happen. And there were other forest health things in that as well. And while we're talking about that too, in the news in the last couple of years, we had an area in, I think it's Beauregard Parish, where they're going to eliminate 2,000 acres of forest to make a solar farm. And then there's other parishes that are looking at developing regulations for solar. So, okay, with the new energy and all that, not knocking that, but it seems like, are you going to harm the forest products industry, or are you going to harm a renewable resource in order to have power? How's that going to affect the risk, you think?
Yep. So a couple things. First, I if you don't mind, I want to touch on that thing you said about the rainforest and the issues that we have here, because you're exactly right. First of all, cutting down rainforests is hard to recover from. So it's bad for the planet, and there are repercussions from that have to do with soil quality and water quality. But that is not the issue here. You're exactly right. So that sensitivity to helping people keep their forests in forests is really the A story. LFA, other forestry associations, the extent that we can help people keep forests in forests, give them the incentives and the motivations and the returns they need to keep forests in forests it's really the best thing that we can do. It just has all these positive consequences, repercussions. Now, with respect to things like solar farms, and this is something we've started tracking a lot closer, because this is happening in states around the country. It's happening in Georgia, where I live, in Alabama, and it's Louisiana, Arkansas. First of all, it's an extremely interesting issue because solar energy is quite interesting. It's a renewable energy source. It's become quite cheap and economic. We're become quite good at this. But one issue that we do have is the question is, are we taking some of our best acres and putting them in solar farms where they come out of forestry? So we did do some research on this, and what we have found, because you can sort of track these acres around the country, is it is a fast-growing thing. For the acres that come out of the system, they're 2 to 1 coming out of ag versus forestry. So it's mostly ag acres that are taking the brunt of this. That said, the forestry acres are being converted in areas that are quite concentrated. So it's not like they're evenly spread out across the South, because if they were, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. What's happening is there's a dot on the map. They have to be near a hookup and near the right power plants, and it's in these very specific counties and parishes where it's a quite concentrated activity. So I'm mindful of this. I think it's good that people are talking about it. I think to the extent that we can put solar farms in places that aren't good for forests, that's good. There are acres that we're constantly converting in and out of forests in the South also. So why don't we go work with some of those acres, these marginal acres? Yeah.
Well, and the evidence of that really lies in Louisiana having about almost 15 million acres, which is a growth from 8-9 years ago. So they're being planted where they weren't before.
Correct.
So hopefully that trend can continue, even though you have some acres that may not recover. Well, plus you have development all the time. So cities, towns, parishes, they have to develop with certain businesses, and that means you're going to get rid of some forests. So I mean, it happens, but you want to try and mitigate that as best as you can.
No, agree. It's hard because it's such a visible thing.
Yeah.
You literally drive by it on the road.
That's
so
true.
When you see it everywhere, it's like, holy cow, how big is this thing?
Yeah, yeah. Driving along the road too, just to in my experience in riding with people, it's kind of like, oh man, look, they just cut down all those trees. Why they cut all the trees down?
Yeah, yeah.
But they don't realize 3 years later there's a new crop coming up.
Yeah.
And it's, in many cases more because they've had a couple of thinnings before. So you have more trees coming up. You have younger forests. You have more carbon. Let's talk about carbon for a little bit. That is another tool that landowners have, and it is something that they're looking at for their forest program. How does that fit in the industry?
So forest carbon is a tricky one because you're exactly right. It does supplement income for some people in some areas. Mm-hmm. So two big issues with carbon. Just one, there's a bunch of technical issues like how do you track it and leakage and permanence and all these like ways that you have to actually track forest carbon and make sure you're managing the forest the way it's supposed to be done, done quote unquote for the forest carbon programs.
Right.
It's actually quite complicated and we're not actually that good at it. We're a lot better than we used to be, but if I do one thing and my neighbor doesn't, net, have we done anything positive? Have we changed anybody's behavior? So there's a set of problems there. But that said, on the flip side, there are two probably market-relevant ways to think about forest carbon that are quite helpful. One is that in parts of the country that have very thin wood markets, like the North, New England, the Mid-Atlantic, part of the Lake States, where they don't have as many mills as we have in the South, and timber prices are lower, forest carbon is a very nice and helpful supplement to help forest owners keep their forests and trees. Because they're not worried about the harvest as much because they don't have wood markets.
Right.
So if someone's willing to pay them something to cover the costs and keep the land and forest, they want to, they get compensated for it. It's good for this other program. Mm-hmm. That's great. The other side, though, is in places that have better wood markets. So like a Louisiana, we get the question, it's like your solar question, are we going to be in a situation where people are going to start pulling wood out of traditional forest products markets and keep them in trees for forest carbon markets? So to me, that's one of those things I worry about. It's an unintended consequence. I don't like that story. Net, maybe it's good. We don't know yet. What I do like is this story. A lot of effort is being put into how do you give forest owners and manufacturers both credit for making wood products? So like a stick of lumber, that's got carbon in it. So I didn't burn I made a solid wood product that's going to be around for 50 to 100 years. It came from a landowner who grew that tree that is still in wood. They're about to grow another tree, which is going to sequester more carbon. They're going to cut another 2x4 out of it, and that's going to also. So that's a quite powerful story. If more and more buildings are in solid wood products that are all holding carbon, that's a very positive story. We just haven't figured out the sort of the daisy chain of events to get some of the credit back to the landowner for that.
It's such a new industry or part of the industry because, and quite frankly, I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Flat out honest, I don't understand it because basically you have forests, I have a factory. I'm not going to put out less carbon or take, than I normally do, but I'm going to say, hey, you've got trees. I'm going to count your trees as credit toward the carbon I'm putting in the atmosphere. I don't get it. I don't get it.
The two things I like about the carbon story, because I'm with you on the math, it's very difficult to track. It feels a little bit of, it feels like a little bit, it's soft, right?
Yeah.
But the two things I do like is if we use wood as a substitute for steel or concrete, I understand that.
Right.
Right? Because it takes less energy and there's stuff in it. I like that story. So that's one story that I do like. Then the other story on the carbon is, the best way to deal with carbon is to emit less of it in the first place. So that's a story I understand.
Yes.
So, like to the extent that we have cleaner factories or the extent that we use less energy per unit of whatever we're doing or our cars are more fuel efficient, that actually scales better. Yeah. So when I did read a report from the United Nations, and they broke out all the carbon programs into these 12 buckets. Only one of them is forestry. The other 11 are all these different things: energy efficiency, ag. But I look at those other buckets, and many of them are much bigger. And so, I'm mindful of that. Is that if we get too far ahead of ourselves in forestry, If those other buckets get really big and really become the primary source of quote unquote the answer or a solution or something, it makes our efforts less meaningful. And so we don't want to forget who we came to the dance with. Which brings me back to the paper and lumber guys. Don't forget, these are the guys that drive the economics of our sector.
Well, the paper industry has been really difficult of late. I mean, we don't even think about it when an Amazon box shows up on our doorstep, but that's where it comes from. Newspapers, that's an industry. It's a medium that has been in decline. A lot of it is moving into the electronic age of that. Matter of fact, when I was in newspaper, Boise Cascade had a plant where they made newspaper. Yeah. They made print there. And so all the newspapers in this region, they knew where it was coming from. Yeah. And now I'm not sure you can buy newsprint in the United States anymore. Yeah, there's only a few mills. You're right that the industry is much smaller. It's the smallest of the traditional paper sectors in North America. So you're exactly. It's tiny. In fact, it started. The origination of that sector was New England. Those were the first pulp and paper mills because they were serving the Boston, New York market for the newspapers back in the day. And then they went to D.C. So that's why the oldest mills in the country are in that area. It's because where the newspapers were, and that's where they needed the newsprint. And if you look at the map of where the closures were, let's say over the past 30 or 40 years, you see those dots. They're older, smaller mills that made newsprint, and they're the ones that have been falling to the wayside. So you're right. This has been a shrinking sector with respect to newsprint, with respect to printing and writing paper. There is some growth in the sector too. The Amazon example is right on. We do use more linerboard than we did. We have the household sanitary products, both for those of us who need them as adults and those who need them as babies. Both ends of that spectrum. There's all those kinds of products are actually growing. I did talk with a pulp mill supervisor just last week, and we were talking about his facility and some of the changes they're making. One of their customers is Amazon. And I said, talk me through the growth in the sector. Are you really growing? What's happening? And he said they are growing, but they also get a lot of pressure from their customers to make the same amount of product with less material. So even Amazon is learning how to make boxes they want them to be as strong but lighter. Yeah. And so that is what they're doing, is they're producing a lot of material that gets the need met, but it uses less fiber, it's more efficient, uses less energy. So I've been paying more attention to the boxes that come to our house, because for some reason it seems like one shows up every day. That sounds like a conversation you might have with your spouse. Yeah. So I know this isn't going on the air, so she'll never hear it. But I go, oh, this looks like another box. It's so nice. They didn't forget us today. So, but these boxes, if you do look at them, the boxes that we get today, and if you have a box in your garage from a couple years ago, you can see there's less material in the box. Or there's less corrugated material, or it's thinner, or like with new pallets that use less wood per pallet, you can see that the pattern is different in it. Yeah. Because the architecture inside the box is a little different. That lets it be more efficient or stronger for the material that's in there. So people are constantly looking for ways to be more efficient. To bring it back to the original point of your question about shrinking sector, net, the sector peaked in the 90s. And so as a pulp and paper sector in the U.S., we're about, plus or minus, about 20% smaller. And it's probably about where we're going to be. We basically squeezed out newsprint. I mean, you're exactly right. There's just not that much being made. And the other sectors are holding steady. The one thing that has been difficult for landowners is that many of these mills are using more and more recycled fiber. Oh, yeah. So we used to ship most of our recycled fiber to China, and now we're not sending as much to China. China's making its own. It's rejecting it. So we have a lot of recycled material in the U.S. It's cheap, and pulp mills have been investing in the ability to consume both virgin fiber and recycled. And so I have mixed feelings about that. One is it reduces their need for wood, which affects thinnings, something we were talking about earlier. But on the flip side, I like that pulp mills are investing, because that means that pulp mills is going to be around for a long time. Even if they use a little bit less wood because they're mixing in recycled fiber, it means there's a commitment to the sector. Right. So anytime somebody pumps a bunch of CapEx, millions of dollars into a plant, it means, okay, they're going to be around. That's good.
Even if they use a little bit less wood, they're still going to be there, and we can live with that if that's across the country.
With residuals and continuing that, you also have synergistic facilities such as what we have in Urania.
Yeah.
An old site there, LaSalle Lumber.
Yes.
And that's another thing I want to get back to, so don't forget about that. And then you have Drax that have come up. They built they purchased a second pellet mill in Louisiana, and so they don't even have to get on a public road to get the residuals from the lumber mill.
Yeah.
And that works really
smart.
Well.
Super smart, right.
So, I mean, will we see things like that happen more in the future?
I think you're right. I think we've seen people be quite strategic about where they locate their residual using mills. We've had more lumber producers who invest in pellet mills or co-locate something. And the logistics of this are extremely important. It's one of the points you made earlier was just about the math of how the whole thing works. And so it doesn't make sense, right, to make a residual and then ship it 100 miles to get used somewhere else. But when someone's right next door, the math works really well. It requires less energy. It's efficient. There's less waste. And not only that, you have two facilities that one's making the solid wood product, the lumber, and then they're selling the residuals to someone who's maybe making pellets or energy. Those are not correlated markets. So that's good from a forest industry standpoint. It diversifies the marketplace, and that's helpful.
Okay. Let's continue on pellets, and then we'll get back to the other point I was trying to ask about with the lumber mill in Urania. But that's sort of a controversial issue right now. Drax has come to Louisiana, and it has been a blessing on our end because it's using a lot of pulpwood. Yeah. And so that's taking a process of taking the coal that has been demonized and using wood.
Yes.
So yes, you're burning it, so you're not holding on to the carbon. I understand that. I get that. But you're using a product that is renewable.
Yes.
Coal is what it is. I don't know if I don't think it's a renewable.
Yeah. Not on our time frame.
Well, yes, exactly. You know, maybe in my great grandsons.
That's right.
But it's something that we can see, feel, touch, and it's immediate.
Yes.
Because we know it's going to get in that cycle. Is that going to be problematic in the future, or what do you see about that industry right now?
Yeah. So I think the way to think about pellets is to think about it as a slice of a bigger portfolio of energy activities. Our team views wood pellets as transitional. It's a bridge, right? It's better than coal, but it's not perfect because it's got the exact problems you're taking pellets and you're shipping them over the Atlantic Ocean to use somewhere else. But it is renewable. It does solve a problem here. It supports good forest health because it moves those thinnings so forest owners can do other things. People keep their land and forests. That's a really good thing. It does help Europe meet some of their carbon emission targets. And the math of that is tricky, right? Depending on how you do the math on that, you get different answers. But it's an improvement. And so if you sort of adhere to the continuous improvement story, is this better than what we were doing? The answer is yes. Is it perfect? The answer is no. But that point is quite important. It's like if you're constantly improving the portfolio of energy activities and you're replacing coal with pellets, you just made an improvement. So then what's the next improvement? Right. And it turns out that these things take a long time. There's some research that shows, I'll give you an example from the communications sector, which is we have a really hard time letting go of what we used to use, right? Yeah. So, true. But we're finally seeing, so this is true in energy, but the communications one sort of stuck with me because it's, we had landlines, and then we have our cell phones, and then we go to texting and email and all these different things. And it's just over the past few years you start to see landlines starting to disappear. But for a while you were like communicating via 5 different mediums. It gets confusing. It's too hard to keep up with. And so the same is true with energy. We've been using coal and oil for a long time. There's an infrastructure behind that. That infrastructure is not very motivated to make itself disappear. So it takes a long time to transition from energy sources over time. Sometimes we get forced into it because you run out of something. Yeah. An example would be like in the late 1800s when we were firing our, even ships up and down the Mississippi River. We were burning wood to power them, or in New England. And so that we ran out of wood that was near the river, and then we went to coal and the furnaces, and we're sort of coming back to wood again. So that cycle is kind of interesting.
I'd wanted to get to Drax is from the UK.
Yeah.
So they're coming to the South.
Yeah.
But we're, I guess to use a very poor pun,
I'm ready.
It's not the British invasion, it's the Canadian invasion for the South.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not knocking it. They've actually been wonderful.
Yeah.
We've had, you know, Camphor come down.
Yeah.
Teal Jones is working on a mill. Interfor has come and purchased an idle mill, and they've got that up and running. Hunt Forest Products, a Louisiana company, is teaming with Toll Industries, a Canadian company. So they have this fantastic partnership that's worked so well in the South Parish. They have a mill in Bienvenue Parish now. So they've got 2 facilities. Or they can do more. We don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But it's worked well enough to have a second one, and that's a wonderful thing. So we're having the Canadians come down in the South and establish mills, which has been great for our economy. It's been great for the rural economy especially. So how does that fit in with the growth that we're hoping for in forest product industries?
So it works out pretty well, fortunately. You know, at a high level, the big story there is that the Canadians came here because their situation at home was so poor. Mm-hmm. At a high level, their forests were mountain pine beetle. They're not growing in Canada the way we are in the U.S. South. We are the market. The wood is cheaper. We have private land ownership. We're not tied to provincial harvest targets. The Pacific Northwest is mostly public lands. But the South is 90+% private lands. We're the fastest growing population-wise region on the continent. It's easier to plant trees and harvest trees and run a logging and hauling crew. We have access to ports and export markets. So all the economics are just so much better in the South that you had these Canadian firms that were looking at themselves and looking around and going, I don't have much opportunity here. They were feeling a grow or die. And what the Canadians do have, and you see this in some of the plants that they built here, is they're tremendous operators of manufacturing facilities. Mm-hmm. You know, they just procured wood in an entirely different way. So the question for us is, hey, when these guys are coming to the South and they're partnering with U.S. operators and loggers and companies, how are they going to deal with the way our markets work? Because they operate differently. And it's been quite fun to watch U.S. operators learn from Canadian manufacturers techniques to improve the way they run a mill with new technology, but also watch Canadian operators adopt the ways that we grow trees and procure wood in the South. Mm-hmm. They're basically like, oh yeah, we don't know how to do it like you guys do it. We're gonna let you do your thing because you're much better at it than we are. So that's been fun to see. To your point, if you look at the largest lumber manufacturers in the South now, 3 of the top 5 are Canadian firms. And so and in the top 5 account for like 60% of the capacity in the South. So even the U.S. firms are getting larger. And so there's a small set of firms that own a lot of the mills. Mm-hmm. Part of that is because they've been buying and growing, and part of that is because old mills have been closing. So we're replacing new mills with old mills with new mills, and most of that capital is coming from a small set of firms.
Is that because the old mills are often independently owned, then they can't keep up with the technology? Is it a cost thing, or is it just, kind of a parts wear out and we need to do something new?
It's a scale thing. It is. It's a cost, it's a fixed cost, and it's a technology thing. As an example, if you build a new mill, so the bigger the mill, the more you can spread out your fixed costs and all that piece of it. But when you get right down to it, a brand new sawmill in the South can produce 1,000 board feet of lumber with about 4 tons of logs. That's the amount of wood that's required. And if you took a smaller mill that was built 30 or 40 years ago, that same facility would require 5 to 6 tons. So you just think about that. You're like, I can make the same amount of product with one fewer ton or 2 fewer tons, and then you do the math of that over millions of board feet. It's quite astounding. And then not only that, but the larger mills are more fuel efficient. They're safer. Like the newest mills, if you take a tour of the newest sawmills, good examples are here in Louisiana. You just see, like, in terms of working conditions, mm-hmm. and for someone to have a career there, they're just cleaner, safer, more comfortable. I mean, it's not working in an office, so it's still different than that. But it is just a much more hospitable environment.
Well, I can tell you the tours I've had with LaSalle when it opened, I think it was 2018 when it opened, and then last year with Canfor. So it's really astounding because we did a story for Forest and People, our magazine, with the plant that Interfor, the mill that Interfor took over in DeQuincy.
Yes.
It's a great facility, don't get me wrong. It really is, and they've made cultural changes there that have been extremely positive, and everybody I talked to over there just had there's a lot of good things to say about Interfor's bringing their culture there and getting that plant going again. And then you have the LaSalle, and then you have Canfor.
Yes.
Very different facilities.
Yes.
But they're cleaner.
Yes.
They're more efficient.
Yeah.
It really was incredible to watch. One of the things that I really enjoyed about Canfor, and this is odd, but it's just me. When you go in, their control room in the facility is made of CLT.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, man, I get it. This is really, really cool. So they're committed. It's like it's shown that they're committed to that industry in making the cross-laminated timber into those walls. And it really is sound efficient. It's absolutely amazing.
I need this tour because I haven't seen that cab. That's a great thing.
I highly encourage take a trip. Talk to Michael Best with Canfor. He's great.
So on this point, Jeff, you're making. I've been to a lot of facilities, right? And in the earlier days of our business, I went on a lot of due diligence visits where people were checking out facilities and deciding whether or not they were going to buy them, or for whatever reason. And one thing I always like to do when I visited facilities is I always like to break away from the group, if possible, and go to the bathroom. Because when you go visit the bathroom, if the bathroom is well maintained, if the hot water works, is there toilet paper in there, it means that the facility cares enough about their employees. Yeah. And there is a relationship. This is a little bit anecdotal, but I have observed more efficient, safer mills often have cleaner bathrooms. It's not always the case. There's outliers of this, but that is something that I think aligns really well with what you're sharing about the new facilities is there is a lot of effort into taking care of people. And one of the struggles we have in our sector is labor. It's a top 3, top 4 issue consistently for facilities, people expanding or acquiring new mills. And so this idea that you really have to think about what the setup is for the people working at the plant, that's a good orientation, and it orients really well with a well-run facility.
What is it we haven't talked about? We've covered a lot of ground in just a few minutes, quite frankly.
It's great. It's great seeing you. We've talked a lot over the years, and we could probably talk. There's a lot of stuff that we both find interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to say, Brooks, I really appreciate you. It's always great to see you.
You too, Jeff. Thank you.
But I really appreciate you taking time for us and sitting down and talk to us, because I think it's good information that people need to know. And at Mining the Forest, that's what we try and do. So thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thanks to Buck and the LFA for the support that you give me and our team, and for what you do for the industry. So thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Mining the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the LFA and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and forest products industry in Louisiana, check out our website at laforestry.com. You can send comments or suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue@laforestry.com. You also can check out the show notes for our contact information. And you can subscribe to Mind the Forest by clicking on the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to tap the notification button as well so you'll know when a new episode drops each month. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate that. And remember, At the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.